For the next project, we're going to replace this factory tabletop with a vintage formica yellow tabletop. I'm going to start by removing the screws on the bracket under the table. There are screws in this board and around in this flange here also, the board and the flange both. I will probably start with the screws in the board and see what that looks like, and if I need to, also remove them from the flange. Amy got this vintage table at an auction for $2. The top and the legs are in pretty bad shape. There's some bad spots in it, so we don't feel too bad about cutting this one up, and we will see if we can make a tabletop out of it. I've taken off the half that I think I can salvage a piece big enough to make a tabletop out of. Now I'm going to take off the side trim and what's left of the rails that hold the two pieces of table together. The hardware is just held on with screws, so I'll take all those screws out. And the same with the trim pieces, they're just held on with screws to the tabletop. I think it's kind of interesting that the bottom of the table was red and the top is yellow. Over here you can see where I've already taken some off. I got all the wide trim pieces taken off and the brackets underneath. But as you can see, the edge piece is probably not salvageable. I was hoping I was going to be able to reuse that, but it's actually, the table is made of two pieces of wood, and this edge piece is sandwiched between them with nails in it. So that's not going to happen. I'm going to have to either buy something online, which looked to be fairly expensive, or make something myself. And I'll probably lean towards making something myself. I had started to lay things out using some duct tape so the jigsaw wouldn't scratch the countertop, but then I realized that I'm not sure which side to cut from, so I'm going to do a couple of little test cuts. I'm using an old skill saw, and I'm going to use a laminate saw blade. I made this test cut, and you can see on the top side it didn't chip it out any. I used this duct tape to see if that would cushion the saw enough, and it appears that no scratches on the tabletop from the saw running on it. But on the back side, if you look at it, you can see a couple of places here where it did chip it. So I want to saw with the saw blade with the saw on the top of the tabletop, on the side that I do not want chipped out. I drew some lines on the top of the table where I want to cut it, and then I put some duct tape on either side of the line so the bottom of the saw doesn't scratch up the table as I cut. I got the first cut made, and I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out. Here on the edge, you can see what I was talking about, how that edging goes in, and the piece was nailed to it on the inside, so there's no way to save that trim. I still don't know what I'm going to do about that yet, but using that jigsaw with the laminate blade made a very nice edge across there. Next, I'm going to cut the edges with the beveled ends, or the radiused ends. I just used a piece of old bearing race that I had. You could use anything, a Tupperware lid or something that's round, just to trace the outline for the cut to make, and then I'll go ahead and put tape on it like I did before and cut this end, and then I will cut it off to length afterwards. I wanted to do the ends first in case I had a little mishap and needed to try again. That way I've got plenty of room on the other end to redo it and cut it off later if I need to. Well, that turned out pretty good. I think I'll go ahead and cut it to the proper length now. I had a little place here on the end where it's not quite, I had the blade crooked or something, but I can just dress that up with a wood rasp. I'll cut the end off and the top will be finished. Well, I got it cut to length. It looks pretty good. I've just got it sitting on top of the old tabletop. Now I need to do something with the edges and square everything up and make it pretty. And compare the old to the new. This is a wood rasp. It's got a fine side and a coarse side, and I will use the fine side on these edges, like right there, just to smooth it off and kind of square that up. I bought this piece of aluminum at our local Menards, and it's 1 inch wide by 1/16 of an inch thick. I made some marks on it for where I'm going to drill the holes to attach it with screws. This is the tag off of the metal. I'm going to use some number 8 by 3/4 sheet metal screws that are stainless steel, and I'll drill the holes. I'm going to use a 11/64 I think drill bit. Yeah, 11/64 to make the hole, and then I'll countersink the other side after I get the holes drilled. To countersink the holes, I'm using a 9/32 inch drill bit and just being careful to only drill partially through so I don't have too big a hole for my screw. Then I'll see if those countersunk screws fit down in there properly. I would have liked to have found oval head screws, but they didn't have them there. I might change them out at a later date if I find some oval head screws. So I've got one side done. I drilled the holes in the metal and countersunk them and put the screws in. I'm just trying to kind of get things in right now for the bending of the corner, but I'm pretty pleased with it so far. We'll see how things go when I try to bend this metal around the corner. I bent it around the corner and it was relatively easy to bend. This is only a 1/16 of an inch thick metal. So now I just need to mark where I'm going to drill the holes and drill them and countersink them and then put the screws in. I've got the first corner done and it turned out pretty good. Now I'm going to do the second quarter, and I've got my assistant to help me videotape this. Just go push it a little at a time, drawing it around as I go. And I want the bottom of this piece of metal flat against the table when I'm going around the corner, so it comes out square with the edge of the table. And that got it. I got the screws in all the way around, and I had about 1.5 inches left over, so now I'm going to cut that off with a hacksaw or Dremel tool or something. I got that end cut off. I just used a hacksaw and then a file to dress up the edges. Now I'm going to take the piece of trim back off and put a bead of caulk in behind it and then screw it back on. After I finished this project, I went in and I noticed my hands were just absolutely filthy from working with that aluminum. What I'm wondering is, if you're sitting here at the table, if you lean up against it, is the aluminum going to get your clothes dirty? And as you can see, it makes a mess on this rag. So I think I'm going to take the tabletop back out and mask off the top and spray it down with some polyurethane or some kind of top coat or clear coat over the aluminum to keep it from rubbing off, and that'll also help keep it more shiny and bright. I've removed the tabletop and cleaned it with some rubbing alcohol and cleaned the edges good that I'm going to paint. And so now that it's cleaned off, I'm going to put masking tape around the edges of the laminate, leaving all the aluminum exposed so I can get a good coat of clear coat on top of that. I got the edges masked off on the table. I used a painter's tape so it'll give me a nice clean edge when I take the tape off. You can see that I left the top edge showing here, of the top edge of the aluminum, and here at the corners I'll take a sharp knife and cut that tape off, and then do the same thing in the other corner. And after I get that done, I'll cover the entire table with newspaper and tape that down, and then I should be ready to paint. I got the top of the table masked off and got the newspaper on it. where I won't have to worry about overspray on my tabletop. This is the paint I'm going to use, and not that there's anything special about this paint. It's what I had on the shelf in the basement, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. It's a satin finish, and if I were buying paint to do it, I would probably buy a gloss, but I did a test spray here, and you can see that looks pretty good, even with the satin finish. So the one thing I did discover when I was trying out the paint, I would recommend doing a test paint, because the nozzle on this can sprayed a really heavy coat and made it run. So I'm going to have to do pretty quick passes back and forth and keep my distance, not get very close to the table when I'm spraying it. Otherwise I'll have runs on the edges, and I want to avoid that. Also, it's a very humid day, and from what I've read, the clear coats tend to be milky or cloudy if there's a lot of humidity in the air. So I'm going to wait for a drier day to do my painting so I don't have the cloudiness in my clear coat. I put 3 good coats of the clear coat on and have taken the paper and tape off, obviously. And before I reinstall this, I'm going to take some silicone and kind of fill in, like right here. I don't think I had my saw blade quite square when I went around this curve, and so the piece of metal didn't fit up real tight against that. So I'm going to fill that with some clear silicone, and any place else on the edges. That's really about the only place I see that the metal has a little gap between there and the table, just to keep like toast crumbs and that kind of thing from looking gross in there. But other than that, it's about ready to go back in, and I'll show you what caulk that I'm going to be using. This is the caulk I'm going to use. Nothing too special about this. The only thing I do like about it, it's a clear caulk, but it goes on white so you can see where you've put it on, and then it dries clear. I took the 4 screws that were at the corners of this board out, and I will put the new table on top of that. Here's the completed tabletop. When I did the installation, you can see how tight it fits up against the wall. The original table fit that way also. And when I first put it in, I had the table leg, straight up and down. But in doing that, there was a little gap between the wall and the table, and I was just afraid it would wiggle around too much going down the road and eventually break something. So I had Amy help me, and I pulled on the table leg while I did the installation, and that's got it snug up against the wall. Here's the area where I put in the caulk to fill the little gap on the one corner. And that's how it looks all finished. We'll be heading out soon to take it on our first trip.